Welcome. The Art of Possible, a celebration of the life and legacy of Charles H. Matheny, affectionately known as Chuck, and moreover known as number one. Number one. And now the real number one is the personal companion to our number one. And we are so grateful, and I can only imagine how outrageous he is being number one in the heavenly places. But the one thing that I would like to say is that in this place and those watching, we all hold a piece of the legacy, and we can each choose to do with what we will. And if Charles H. Matheny is our and continues to be our example, the good work that God began with Walter and Marguerite Matheny back so long ago, God will help us to see it onward. But we must take up that challenge, and we must move forward and do what we know to do and what we know Charles H. Matheny, our Chuck, would love us to do.
I saw a lot of families that had tragedies that they experienced with their children. And it's interesting that when a significant issue faces a child, there are two things that usually happen. Either the family pulls together or it ends up tearing them apart. And unfortunately, in many cases, the families ended up falling apart after those kinds of incidences. But those that pulled together really pulled together, and they became stronger. And when I came here and understood what Walter and Marguerite Matheny did when they had a child who they were told might not live very long and then wouldn't be able to attend regular school, they pulled together and they started a small school that ended up being this enterprise that you see today. And the whole tenor of what they did was based upon their love for Chuck. And Chuck demonstrated that love in the life that he lived. You think about what he did and what he was able to accomplish. He had a spirit about him, and he led a life of service. Every commencement of our school, the mayor is here and would sit up here. Chuck would always have a speech that he would write that was different every year, but conveyed the same message about the abilities that one has and how they need to use them to their full potential. His spirit will live on. So thanks for coming today, and I'm going to pass it on and hope you enjoy a life that really needs to be celebrated.
I think what brought us together is one man, and we can all share stories afterwards. I have to say that I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be part of the Matheny community. It was upsetting, but we're here to celebrate his life and everything that he achieved and the path that he made for everyone to follow.
I do not live with my handicap, I live with my spirit. We all know Chuck's spirit, but we also know that his spirit is driven by the Holy Spirit. And that became very obvious yesterday at the memorial service at Basking Ridge Presbyterian Church, and again today. Eternal and loving God, in whom we live and move and have our being, we ask your blessing upon this great gathering, all who have come to celebrate and give thanks for the life and legacy of Chuck Matheny. In the vibrancy and yet the stillness of this hour, filled with music, visuals, presentations, and memories, may we be lifted out of sadness to find ourselves in the peace and joy of your holy presence with us. Amen.
Chuck was an inspiration to many of fun, of love, of trust in God's will and time, and as a human being. Having a sense of humor was certainly one of his trademarks, but he also had some great words of wisdom. I am honored to share an excerpt of this autobiographical memoir from 2001. I am not here to tell you how great I am or to tell you what you can or cannot do, nor am I here to tell you that you are handicapped. I am not concerned about these things. I am more concerned about your attitude. In fact, I do not really think of myself as a handicapped person. Some of you may not be able to do all the things that I can do physically, such as cutting grass and plowing the snow with my gravely and maintaining 6 Coke machines. I am a member of the Kiwanis Club, honorary chairman of the Crop Walk, a member of my church, a blood donor, and a sponsor of an Indonesian child. The friends that I have been blessed to have nearly all my life and the friends that I make for short periods of time all tell me that the main thing they enjoy about me is that I do not use my handicap to get what I want. Because of this, my friends and family think of me as a friend rather than as a person with a handicap. There is nothing better than hearing, "I love you," or receiving a warm embrace. Again, I am not here to tell you that you are handicapped. I am more concerned about your attitude. You will be surprised what can happen when you live and share love. I do not live with my handicap. I live with my spirit.
Charles Chuck Matheny was chosen. God had a plan for him. Some people dream of the future, but are unable to shape reality. A few like Marguerite and Walter Matheny actually turn the dream into reality and leave a legacy that forever changes the landscape of life. Faced with the reality that their son was born with cerebral palsy and that they saw a world that could not respond to children with special needs, they began their journey with a passion for their son's welfare and their concern for many other children with developmental disabilities. Chuck knew perfectly well that Matheny Medical and Educational Center existed because of him, and he accepted that responsibility with pride and a little humor. When I became president in 1998, I remember having a conversation with him in the hallway, and Chuck's first words to me, as had been mentioned previously, "Remember, Proctor, I'm number 1. You're number 1A." That put me in my place right away, and from that time forth, he would never let me forget it. Chuck became known as the mayor of the Hill. As years passed, Chuck became a special fixture in both Peapack as well as Somerset County. His community involvement in causes for humanity was extensive. He was very involved in raising money to fight world hunger, as has been mentioned, through the Church World Service Crop Walk, which as a result of being one of the event's top fundraiser, was renamed the Chuck Matheny Crop Walk. In 2000, Chuck was named Somerset Hills Kiwanian of the Year for his efforts to coordinate volunteer groups. His life was full and a model for all of us to emulate. The Matheny of today is a sophisticated medical and educational facility serving many infants, children, and adults with complex medical conditions and developmental disabilities from across New Jersey as well as across the country. It all began with Charles Chuck Matheny and his mother and father planting the seed for a change in society's thinking and understanding of disabilities. Chuck was, as we say, a good man, but also was a symbol of all that is kind and righteous in the world. He is now in a place without boundaries and without barriers. He walks with the angels. Be at peace, my friend. Thank you.
See, that was the greatest part about Chucky. He never forgot anybody. Whether they were here, whether they were outpatients, group home, workshop, he knew everybody. And by the way, he never forgot to tell you he was number 1. So when he asked me about Jaime, I couldn't bring myself to tell him that Jaime had passed away because it was Christmas. So instead, I'm quick on my feet, changed the subject, and said, "Hey, Chuck, what do you want for Christmas?" And he smiled and said, I already have my present, Marilyn. I have you.
I believe that positive attitude was instilled in Chuck at a very early age. At yesterday's celebration of life services at the Basking Ridge Presbyterian Church, both John Garrity and Chuck's niece, Mary Heather Noble, referenced the series of letters written by Marguerite Matheny to her son Chuck when he was a young boy. One of those letters, written in 1947, when Chuck was only 6 years old, included her now famous words. Those words were, "The hardest job is not to obtain our physical best, but to learn the gracious way to bear the handicap, to accept imperfection with poise and dignity, and yet continue to strive for that perfection, to admire and respect the abilities of others without feeling sorry for oneself, and to meet the world with something to offer rather than to ask concessions." That paragraph describes exactly how Chuck lived his life. He accepted his handicap with grace and courage. He never felt sorry for himself, and he strove to achieve his personal best. I'm sure Chuck Matheny made his parents proud by continuing to carry the torch of their long-held dream to the next generation. After 62 years, the program and basic philosophies continue to thrive. As Marguerite Matheny stated, respect the abilities of others without feeling sorry for oneself, and to meet the world with something to offer rather than to ask concessions. Chuck, you were a beacon of achievement and a caring friend to so many people. Rest in peace. You will be missed. We love you, my friend.
He was a great man, and he was my babysitter too. He made me laugh, and we watched TV together when he would babysit me. I also enjoyed helping him with the soda and candy machines. I thank him deeply for every opportunity I have been given. He was a special man in my life. I love him a million, zillion, trillion times over. I will miss him.
Walter and Marguerite dreamed that their son and children like him should reach their maximum potential and become contributing members of society. And Chuck did just that. You've all heard his accomplishments. He was the groundskeeper at Matheny. He was an active member in his church, and he raised money to fight hunger throughout the world. He taught physical therapy students how to work with the physically disabled, and he traveled extensively alone throughout the United States and Europe. All I can say as a parent of a child with special needs is, wow. Oh my gosh, how overwhelming is that? A child who was born in 1941, no one would have dreamed that was possible. It is hard to imagine what life would be like for me and my son and my daughter if Chuck was not born. Our lives would be very challenging, and they would be very different. We owe it all to Chuck Matheny for being born into this world with cerebral palsy, to incredible parents who had a dream and a vision for their child. And it is because of Chuck Matheny that my son and thousands like him are thriving and continuing to develop and are striving to meet their maximum potential. And it is because of Chuck Matheny that my daughter and I and families like us are able to live productive lives and advocate for the disabled and contribute to society in a meaningful way. We, parents and students and children of Matheny, are eternally grateful to Chuck Matheny. I know he is up in heaven looking down on us with that big smile of his. So here's to you, Chuck Matheny, for a life well lived.
It was a pleasure and an honor to be a friend of Chuck Matheny over the years that I've been here. And everybody knows Chuck befriended everybody. One group that he particularly took an interest in, everybody knows, was our residents. And I couldn't help but remember not long ago walking down the hallway and seeing Chuck in his wheelchair engaging with one of our little guys in the hallway, and it just struck me. It was a great moment because this little guy was just so mesmerized by Chuck, and it was just a beautiful moment. And that's the way Chuck was with all of the residents here. They weren't just residents, they were his family. My brother and his wife worked here back in the 70s and the 80s, and I gave him a call the other day and asked him if he had any remembrances. And he told me he would remember at times he would be sitting in the front of the building, on a nice summer day, and Chuck would come by in his golf cart, and he would stop and visit with my brother, and they would just talk and laugh and spend quality time together. And he went on to say this is something that Chuck always did. This was common for him. And anybody who was hanging out, Chuck would stop by and visit them. And of course, in the background, his wife would yell out, and yeah, he liked to chase the girls around in his golf cart too. We all know he was a flirt, but he was also pure in heart. One of the other things Chuck and I would talk about is he would ask me how my family was doing. And I would always tell him how they were, because while I worked here, I met the woman who would mother my 3 children, who are my treasures. And he would say, I'm responsible for that. And it was true. And when I thought about it, there are so many families that Chuck is responsible for. You look at the Coyles and the Hoods and a number of other families that are here today. If it wasn't for him, these families wouldn't be here. He touched tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives.
The Matheny story is one of overcoming obstacles and challenges, and it is now our responsibility to carry on that story and that responsibility, not just at this facility, but every day with everyone that we meet. I would like to close with an Eskimo legend. Perhaps they are not stars, but rather openings in heaven, where the love of our lost ones pours through and shines down upon us to let us know that they are happy. Thank you.